2 days later, Karen watched from her window as a city truck pulled up to the Thompson house. Marcus came out, clearly confused, to meet with the zoning officer. Karen couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Marcus's gestures growing more animated, his voice rising. Her doorbell rang 15 minutes later. "You called the city on me." Marcus stood on her porch, his 5-year-old son hiding behind his legs, over a kid's pool. Karen opened the door just wide enough to maintain the security chain. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me." The officer said someone filed a complaint about unpermitted recreational structures. Marcus's voice was tight with controlled anger. "My son's birthday party is tomorrow." Karen's eyes drifted to the little boy, who was clutching a Batman action figure and staring up at her with wide, confused eyes. For a moment, something twisted in her chest, a feeling she didn't want to name. "If you had followed proper procedures from the beginning," she started. "It's a pool that cost $49 at Walmart." Marcus's composure finally cracked. "What is wrong with you?" The little boy started crying. Marcus immediately picked him up, whispering comforting words while glaring at Karen over his son's head. "Fix this," he said quietly. "Whatever you did, fix it." Karen closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Through the window, she watched Marcus comfort his son, bouncing him gently and pointing toward the pool where other children were now arriving for an impromptu play date. Her phone rang. Jennifer's name flashed on the screen. "Karen, I need to ask you something. Did you exaggerate the situation when we talked?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, my officer says it's a small inflatable pool, not the permanent structure you described. He feels like he was sent on a wild goose chase." Karen's mouth went dry. "I never said it was permanent. You said it was a major installation affecting property lines and drainage." "Karen, this isn't what I do favors for." The line went dead. Karen stared at her phone, feeling the familiar sensation of walls closing in around her. She'd felt it before, in the principal's office when parents complained about her disciplinary methods, during her divorce when Richard had accused her of being impossible to live with, and now here, in her perfect house in her perfect neighborhood. Outside, children's laughter echoed across the yards. Karen pulled the curtains closed and sat in her darkened living room, already planning her next move. If zoning wouldn't work, there were other options: environmental protection, noise ordinances, property line surveys. Karen Whitmore had never backed down from a fight in her life, and she wasn't about to start now. "And the damages you're seeking: compensation for decreased property value, emotional distress, and an injunction requiring the removal of all unpermitted recreational structures." James was quiet for a long time, studying her face. "Karen, can I speak to you off the record?" She nodded. "You look terrible. When's the last time you ate a real meal? Slept more than 4 hours? Talked to another human being about something other than pools?" Karen's carefully constructed composure began to crack. "That's not relevant to my case." "It's relevant to you." James leaned forward. "I've known you for 8 years. You're one of the most determined people I've ever met. But this isn't determination anymore. This is obsession. I'm protecting my community. You're destroying it." The words hit like a physical blow, "and you're destroying yourself in the process." Karen left the law office without hiring James, but his words followed her home like angry ghosts. She pulled into her driveway and sat in her car, looking at her house. The house she'd fought so hard to keep in the divorce. The house she'd maintained to museum-quality perfection. The house that now felt like a mausoleum. Across the street, Marcus was setting up a barbecue while his son played in the pool with 3 other children. The birthday party she tried so hard to ruin was happening 2 weeks late, but it was happening. Karen got out of her car and walked across the street before she could talk herself out of it. "Marcus." He looked up from the grill, wariness replacing surprise on his face. "Karen." "I." The words stuck in her throat like broken glass. "I wanted to apologize." Marcus set down his spatula. "Okay. I was wrong. About the pool. About everything." She looked at the children playing, at the joy on their faces, at the simple pleasure of water and sunshine and childhood. "I forgot what it was like to just enjoy things." "Why?" The question was simple and devastating. Karen thought about her empty house, her silent phone, her carefully maintained yard that no one ever visited. I think I forgot how to be happy, so I decided no one else should be either. Marcus studied her face for a long moment. You want a burger? I made too many. The invitation was simple, unexpected, and terrifying. Karen almost said no, almost retreated to her safe, sterile house where she could nurse her grievances in solitude. Instead, she nodded. As she sat at Marcus's picnic table, watching children play and listening to adult conversation that had nothing to do with property values or community standards, Karen felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time. It wasn't friendship. That would take even longer. But it was a beginning. Later that evening, as she walked back to her house, Karen noticed that the Hendersons had strung lights around their pool area. The soft glow was actually quite pretty against the darkening sky. She made a mental note to compliment them tomorrow. But first, she had some resignation letters to write. Karen's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling and mentally rehearsing her conversation with Inspector Rodriguez. She'd scheduled the health department visit for 9 a.m., early enough to catch any overnight violations, late enough to ensure Marcus was at work and couldn't interfere. She dressed in her most authoritative outfit, navy blazer, sensible flats, and the pearl necklace her mother had left her. In the mirror, she looked every inch the concerned citizen protecting her community. The dark circles under her eyes only added to her gravitas. Mrs. Whitmore? Inspector Rodriguez was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with kind eyes and a tired expression that suggested he'd dealt with plenty of HOA disputes before. Thank you so much for coming, Inspector. I know how busy you must be. Karen led him toward the Thompson property, her heels clicking against the sidewalk. I've documented several concerning observations. The pool sat innocently in the backyard, a cheerful blue oasis surrounded by pool toys and tiny lawn chairs. A Batman float bobbed gently in the center. I see the pool, Rodriguez said, pulling out his tablet. What specifically are your concerns? Karen consulted her clipboard. First, there's no visible filtration system meeting county standards. Second, I haven't observed any chemical testing procedures. Third, the proximity to the property line creates runoff issues that could affect neighboring foundations. Rodriguez walked around the pool taking photos. It's an inflatable pool, ma'am. These typically don't require the same regulations as permanent installations. But surely there are still health standards. Karen's voice carried a note of desperation she hadn't intended. What about stagnant water breeding bacteria? Mosquito larvae? Chemical contamination of groundwater? The inspector knelt beside the pool and dipped a testing strip into the water. pH is fine. Chlorine levels are appropriate. Water's clean. He stood, brushing off his knees. This looks like a well-maintained temporary pool. Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. What about permits, safety barriers, child protection measures? For a pool this size on private property, none of those are required. Rodriguez's tone was patient but firm. I understand your concerns as a neighbor, but there's no health code violation here. After he left, Karen stood in her driveway, watching Marcus's 5-year-old son splash happily in the pool while his grandmother supervised from a lawn chair. The sound of laughter felt like nails on a chalkboard. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda Chang. Heard about the inspection. This needs to stop, Karen. Karen deleted the message and scrolled through her contacts until she found what she was looking for. Jennifer Walsh, City Planning Department. Jennifer had been Karen's sorority sister 30 years ago, and while they weren't close, all connections had their uses. Jenny, it's Karen Whitmore from Willowbrook. I hope you're well. Listen, I'm calling about a potential zoning violation in my neighborhood. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. When Karen hung up, she was smiling for the first time in days. Zoning was different from health codes. Zoning had teeth. Karen Whitmore stood in her perfectly manicured front yard at 6:47 a.m., clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield, watching in horror as her new neighbor filled an inflatable pool the size of a small garage. The audacity of it all made her hands shake as she scribbled furiously on her violation form. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cutting through the morning air like a rusty blade. "You there with the thing?" Marcus Thompson looked up from the pool pump, water hose still in hand. At 28, he was everything Karen despised about the younger generation. Tattoos peeking out from his tank top, music playing from a Bluetooth speaker, and worst of all, a complete disregard for proper homeowners association protocol. "Morning, neighbor," Marcus said with a grin that made Karen's eye twitch. "Beautiful day for a swim, don't you think?" Karen's pencil snapped in half. "That monstrosity is a clear violation of Section 4.3b of our HOA guidelines. Temporary recreational structures require prior approval and must meet specific dimensional requirements. It's just a pool, lady. My kid's turning 5 next week. Just a pool?" Karen's voice climbed an octave. "Do you have any idea what kind of liability issues this creates? The health hazards? The property value implications?" Marcus turned off the hose and faced her fully. "Look, I read the rules. Nothing says I can't have a pool in my backyard. Nothing explicitly forbids it, because normal people understand basic community standards without having to be told." Karen's face had turned the color of a ripe tomato. "This is Willowbrook Estates, not some trailer park." The comment hung in the air like toxic gas. Marcus's smile faded, and Karen immediately knew she'd crossed a line. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down. It was what she always did when cornered. "I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting," she announced, spinning on her heel. "This ends today." 3 hours later, Karen sat at the head of the conference table in the community center, surrounded by 4 other board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Bob Martinez, the treasurer, kept checking his watch. Sandra Kim was openly scrolling through her phone. Only Gerald Hofstein, her loyal secretary, seemed interested in Karen's PowerPoint presentation titled "The Pool Crisis: A Comprehensive Risk Assessment." As you can see from slide 14, Karen clicked her laser pointer with military precision. The statistical likelihood of drowning incidents increases by 37% when pool installations occur without proper oversight. "Karen," interrupted Linda Chang, the board president, "it's a kiddie pool. It's 3 feet deep. Depth is irrelevant. Water is water." Karen's pointer jabbed at the screen. "And have we considered the mosquito breeding implications? The increased foot traffic? The noise pollution?" Bob raised his hand. "I drove by earlier. The pool's barely visible from the street." "That's not the point, Bob. The point is precedent." Karen's voice took on the tone she perfected during her 15 years as a middle school principal. "If we allow this, what's next? Above-ground pools? Hot tubs? Slip and slides?" Sandra looked up from her phone. "My kids would love a slip and slide." Karen's laser pointer clattered to the table. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Chaos, anarchy, the complete breakdown of civilized society." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and Karen's increasingly heavy breathing. She realized she was sweating through her blazer, her carefully applied makeup beginning to crack around the edges. "Look," Linda said gently, "maybe we should table this until next month's meeting. Give everyone time to—" "No." Karen's voice was quiet but firm. "We vote today." Gerald cleared his throat. "I second Karen's motion for an immediate cease and desist order." "Gerald, there is no motion on the table," Linda said with barely concealed irritation. "Then I'm making one," Karen said, standing up so quickly her chair toppled backward. "I motion that we classify the Thompson pool as a health hazard requiring immediate removal." The vote was 3-2 against her. Karen stared at the hands raised in opposition, feeling something crack inside her chest like ice on a winter pond. "Fine," she whispered, gathering her papers with trembling hands. "But when someone drowns in that death trap, don't come crying to me." She walked out of the meeting with her head held high, but her mind was already spinning with plans. If the board wouldn't protect the community, she'd have to do it herself. After all, someone had to be the adult in the room. That evening, Karen sat in her kitchen, laptop open, researching municipal pool regulations and public health codes. By midnight, she had 17 potential violations documented and a direct line to the county health inspector. The war for Willowbrook Estates had begun. Karen woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of her own screaming. The nightmare had been vivid. She was drowning in a sea of inflatable pools while children laughed and pointed from the safety of their floats. She sat up in bed, sweat-soaked and shaking, and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd slept through the night. It had been 2 weeks since the zoning incident, and Marcus's pool was still there. Worse, other neighbors had started installing their own pools, creating what Karen mentally termed the summer of aquatic anarchy. The Henderson twins had matching kiddie pools. Old Mr. Patterson had set up a hot tub on his deck. Even Linda Chang had bought one of those fancy above-ground pools with a deck attached. Karen had filed 17 complaints with various city departments. Only 3 had resulted in inspections, and none had resulted in removals. Her reputation with City Hall was, according to Jennifer's final text message, completely shot. At 6 a.m., Karen sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and her laptop, scrolling through legal websites. The phrases private nuisance lawsuit and property value damage glowed on her screen like beacons of hope. Her phone rang. It was Gerald. "Karen, we need to talk. If this is about the emergency board meeting I requested, it's about the petition." Karen's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "What petition?" "The one to remove you from the board. Linda has 23 signatures already." The coffee cup slipped from Karen's fingers, shattering against the tile floor. "They can't do that. I've done nothing but protect this community." Gerald's voice was gentle but firm. "Karen, you've filed 42 complaints in 2 weeks. The city is threatening to stop responding to calls from Willowbrook residents. You've made us all look like cranks." Karen stared at the coffee spreading across her kitchen floor, dark and inevitable. "Those pools are ruining everything. Can't you see that? They're just pools, Karen. Kids playing in water. It's summer." After Gerald hung up, Karen sat in the spreading puddle of coffee and felt something she hadn't experienced since Richard left: complete and utter defeat. The walls of her perfect house seemed to be closing in, and outside, she could hear the splash and laughter of children enjoying their last weeks of summer vacation. But defeat wasn't in Karen's vocabulary. It never had been. At noon, she put on her best dress and drove to the offices of Pemberton, Hayes and Associates, attorneys at law. James Pemberton had been her divorce lawyer, and while he'd grown to clearly dislike her during the proceedings, he was competent, and he owed her money from an overpayment she'd never bothered to collect. "Karen," James looked genuinely pained to see her. "What can I do for you?" "I want to sue my homeowners association for failing to enforce community standards." James leaned back in his leather chair. "On what grounds?" "Breach of fiduciary duty. They're allowing property values to decline through selective enforcement of regulations." The words came out in a rush, practiced and polished from 2 weeks of rehearsal.